Find a spot for
We're
me.
just going to get warmed up here and start up YouTube. Hello, everyone. We haven't quite officially started. I'm dragging a little bit of ass this morning, but I will get there. We appreciate your patience. Monday morning. Wow, it's crazy to think we're already 3/4 of the way through April. Just a week left. Going into May and then June shortly after that, and the Colorado retreat. Well, mini retreats. That's going to be a lot of fun. I got to say, I'm really excited about that. All right, let me just shut this down. There we go. It's quite the interesting background that Andrew's got at the moment. Of course, he's been traveling. Chat window, just welcome everyone. Welcome everyone.
All right.
And
Yes.
there we are.
All right. Sweet. Is my connection coming in?
Yeah, you seem all right.
Sweet. All right. That's always my fear getting into these Airbnbs. Like that Wi-Fi better fucking work for video calls. Because yeah, they'll say like good Wi-Fi, and then it's like, yeah, but the video calls, that's what I need, and that takes the most bandwidth. So anyway,
Good Wi-Fi until my teenagers downloading porn.
yeah, exactly. Or fucking they are, who knows? No, it's just a single dude. Yeah, so I'm saying, and so yeah, I guess that's somewhere we can start. I'm in LA in Venice Beach right now. So you can see got a little sunburn over the last couple of days in the nicer weather, which has been nice. But yeah, I'm here for the week. I'm staying in a Airbnb. Just this is, you can see my bedroom and the mess of clothes that I yeah from the weekend. But yeah, here just it's a 3-bedroom staying in. It's just rented a room separately, but it's right by the exit. So it's I haven't seen the guy who hosts it since I got in on Friday and we met for the first time, and I've been out and about with friends, but it's been nice. I was just telling Ray, it's been like throughout the winter. I was in Utah the whole time and have been from more or less, I mean, besides our retreat, since Thanksgiving, so like November through mid April, so a good, what was that, 4 or 5 months or so. And I felt like I was fucking hibernating and just not involved in society. So even just since being back, one of the main things I'm doing besides just traveling, seeing a new city, I've never been to LA like proper. I've been to Orange County and like places nearby, but big part besides trying to get on podcasts as best as I can. Haven't been able to lock anything down in LA yet, but just meeting as many people as I can, having conversations. And a lot of people, all of my points of views are out in the open, on the internet. So those who come across my stuff usually have an idea of the types of things I enjoy talking about. But it's been interesting just having different conversations with people and seeing kind of where they're coming from, because people come at it from a lot of different points of view. And it's been fun. It's always fun interacting with people just to see, how far you can push the envelope, how willing they are to get into, go beyond the classic meditation sort of self-help spiritual stuff into identity, the idea of yourself, the story you tell yourself, all of those things, and finding ways to I don't want to say, I don't want to sound like I'm trying to convince anyone, because I'm not. It's just getting it across in a way. So I use the term like to pitch it to them, but it's really just having the conversation and coming at it from different points of view. I think that'll honestly inform this conversation and my content, because throughout the winter, admittedly, like my social life has been, our Patreon calls, podcasts, like guests we have on. So it's all surrounding this conversation. So it's been pretty easy for me to just continue on this trajectory, whether you want to say it's going like down in terms of depth or like, trajectory up, whatever, deeper into this conversation without much hitches along the way. It's all sort of processing deeper in, because everyone involved in our Patreon calls are involved. Obviously, they've come across the podcast. They know kind of where we're coming from. So it's been, even just in the last, 3 days, just kind of fun, but also interesting to maintain the perspective of being, the person that I'm interacting with, being God, being just reality, and all the depth that comes with that. And also being human, not to put it lightly, but and then being involved in the conversation, and even sometimes just willingly letting the perspective of being the person that I'm talking to go, just to be not involved. And I don't even want to say it like that, because that's not what it is. It's not like this perspective, oh, I have to let that go in order to be involved in this. Like, you absolutely, it's like having that perspective, you're more involved in it because it's not what you think. It's not the conceptual idea. So it's just you being there with the person. It's no different. It's just there isn't so much in the way anymore. So you're more involved with that. So anyway, that's my little intro spiel to today's live stream, raw episode, Twitch stream. But yeah, having a lot of fun. It's good to be back interacting with humanity and society.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's an important lesson, especially when there's often the assumption of this, metaphysical conversation, because that really is it. Like, you talk to people, they start talking about astrology, or they talk about God, or they talk about politics, or they talk about their worldview, or they talk about their assumptions about people, or whatever it is. And immediately you have a different assumption, or immediately you have a different perspective of what they're talking about, because of the overarching differences in how you've decided to approach reality, let's just say. But while you're exploring all that stuff, like getting into this conversation, it can become just as much a wall as any other conversation if you start treating it as a conversation, as we're talking about unity, for example, because we're not. At the end of the day, I think that's really important to keep in mind, is that all you're really doing is practicing being here. All the other stuff is kind of a journey towards uncomplicating here, because here became so complicated to begin with. And so this conversation, as much as it will tear down walls, can also create a wall. And all of a sudden you kind of assume this persona, like, I live in a different world than all of you. And it's like, no, you don't at the end of the day, or at least that's not the reality. It may feel like that by contrast, according to what they're thinking about. It's the same world. It's just that they're existing in their perception of the world, and you're trying to exist just in the world. Right. So it really is a grounding conversation at the end of the day. It doesn't have to get all metaphysical. I could talk to anybody about anything and never once bring up unity, never once bring up the fact that we're all one, or division is just a perception. I don't have to mention any of that, because that's really not the point. That's really not, I guess, the crux of what this discussion is about. This discussion is about the fact that there's nowhere to go. And if that's the case, there's nowhere to take anyone. You can just be here. And I think that's it. But that's when discussions do become fun, because that's when you start recognizing that, that conversation with the stranger at the bar who's had a few too many, and he's telling you about how his last relationship went downhill and so on and so forth. And you're listening to them and just saying, like, yeah, man, I can understand how that'd be hard, trying to make light of a joke here and there, if you can, to pick up their mood, and then just sending them on their way. Like, that in itself, it's just the little opportunities to uplift, because you're not being dragged down. That's really it. And so all we're ever doing is letting go of reasons to be dragged down. So that way it doesn't mean anything when it comes to uplifting people. We're just like, yeah, I can do that. I feel like doing it anyway, because we're not feeling weighed down ourselves. And that's it. That's really all it's about. So this is a good period of integration, because, it's funny. You've had like 4.5 months or 5 months in Utah, living at your parents' place. And I went into the rainforest for 8 months, and you come out and you start interacting with the muggles, as it were, the normies, and you start trying to have conversations, and they're telling you about their pensions, and they're telling you about their careers, and they're telling you about that new 4x4 they're going to buy, and they're telling you about all this stuff. And at first there's almost this tongue-in-cheek kind of participation. You're like, that's great, that seems really important. But after a while, you start to recognize that to them it is important, to the depth that they're able to recognize that. I mean, it may not be important for great reasons, but maybe that's all the reason they have. Maybe that's all they have right now. And so it's even more important to some degree. So it's important to get in there and just be with people. You know, you don't have to be espousing philosophical concepts to just be able to hang with them and make them smile for a couple of minutes just because you have an easier time smiling yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great, all of that I resonate with even just the last couple of days, because I've interacted with a number of people and gone to some just like creator meetups, because there's so many people on social media in LA, and I have some friends, and so I've met up with them, and they have friends that I've gotten in touch with. And well, I think it's funny because you bring up, like, people talk about their pension, things like that, like the modern day thing of that, in especially in LA, is like, founder of a startup dealing with seed funding or something. And that's the equivalent that I've seen in this. And I will say, I think the overall conversation is shifting. Like, even this morning, I went on a walk with a friend of a friend who put us in touch because he's gotten into more, gotten into just questioning things in general, gotten into mushrooms a little bit, and finding out more of those types of things. And so that was a really fun conversation we had. We're able to get a little bit, deeper into stuff and identity and the stories we tell ourselves and things like that. But this weekend I went to this like creator get together thing, and like a lot of the conversations were surrounding, there was a few people who had like founded different startups in the creator space. And so it was an interesting balance, because people are still, running into the same struggles that everyone's always inevitably going to run into when they're utilizing their idea of themselves to feel better. And so it was interesting you brought up the pension thing. Like, I see that, modern day in LA as being, starting a company and talking about the struggles with that, the dealings with that. And I've said it before, but like the whole financial world and all the things around it, like I've learned a lot from Ray and just the conversations we've had, even just about, the money systems and the government and the corporate entity of the government that it is. But in general, I haven't done a ton of digging into those things. And so I'm following along, and I'm a curious person. So I'm always willing to ask questions when people are talking about, throwing around certain, phrases that I don't understand. I'm just like, what exactly does that mean? Like, I have no issue with clarifying that. Whereas in the past, I probably would have just been like, I would sound dumb if I asked that. Because even with that, it allows people to, maybe explain it in a different way. I always really appreciate when I say something and someone's like, what does that mean? Even though some people would probably not bring it up because they don't want to sound like that. It usually leads to a more of a depth of conversation. But it's interesting that people still, no matter what, no matter how well their business is doing, no matter how well they feel like they're doing, no matter how nice, like one of the people I met with that hosted us they have this super nice house that like the business that they founded, pays for it, I believe. So it's like a business expense, but it's still super nice. And everyone still struggles with the same sorts of things, same sorts of issues. And every single time it always comes down to perception of self. And there's so many things that go into that, this world of comparison, this world of judgment, this world of, needing to be enough. Like, that's what so much of it is. Like, people can make a lot of money, and then they think they see other people who has founded a business and they're doing, making twice as much in annual revenue or sales or whatever. And so they're trying to be that. And it's like, there's no end to that road. And I don't think people realize that. I don't think when you're in it, everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to get to this point and then it's going to be, all sunshine and rainbows. And there's no ending to that, especially in recognizing eternity. There's no end to eternity. You're always just here now. And so your experience here now has to be the priority. So coming back to just my experience with this, I've on top of enjoying the conversations and whatnot, it really is just making the most of each and every situation, like really being in it when I'm in it. And I think traveling can actually help with that just because everything's so new all the time. I walk down the street and it's like a street I've never seen in my life. And I even felt that driving here from Utah. I've driven to Las Vegas before, which is a little over halfway to LA. The drive to LA is 12 hours, drive to Vegas is like 7. But even so, when I got past Las Vegas, I was like, I had been outside LA before, but I was kind of like, this is completely new territory for me. Like, this is more of myself that I've never seen before. Like, this is fucking awesome. And now there's going to be a bunch of people that I interact with, and every group of people I've interacted with, I'm like, this is an entirely new perspective that I've never seen, never interacted with. So each and every time I interact with someone, it's like there's an excitement to it in finding out, where they're coming from. And so as much as that's exciting, it's also funny and kind of like reassuring to me that we're having this conversation so often, because each and every time when someone butts up against something, it's always the same route every single time. Perception of yourself, idea of yourself, the story you tell yourself, no matter what, no matter how well they're doing, no matter how down in the dumps they feel they are, it all comes back to that every single time. So it's and once people find out sort of what my content's about, it's interesting to see them open up and share things about their life. And they're like, oh, I actually had this experience where I totally questioned that story I was telling myself, and I realized that it wasn't really true. And I was like, we got to talk more. And so I like had to go, and then I came back to that person. I was like, so about that. And it's been fun to see certain people really latch onto it because of their experiences that they've been through, and there's like a resonation. But everyone has something, like everyone has a story they tell themselves, and the more often you can recognize that, no matter, there's not a good story you can tell yourself to get yourself out of that, it's just a letting go of that story, is just always what it comes back to.
Regardless of the fact that it will continue to create itself, it will continue to pop up. Your story will continue to manifest itself in your mind's eye as the trajectory of your life moving forward into the quote unquote future, regardless of your best efforts, regardless of how much you might tell yourself, like, right, there is no story. That does not mean that your brain is going to have an easy time functioning that way. Your brain is always operating within the perception of time. And so it's really important to recognize that there's nothing wrong with the story. Like, there's nothing wrong with perceiving a trajectory. It's the commitment to that trajectory as truth that ultimately creates pain and suffering and all of that that downward spiral that we see people experience. And that's all we're talking about, because we're really invested in our dreams. Like, we're really invested in what we see as the path moving forward for us. And of course we are, right? Of course we are, because we're looking at our lives and thinking, what do I want? What is this? What do I want this to be? What is the deepest expression of everything that I am moving forward? And how can I find out more about myself? And there's this primal fucking drive to just continue on. But we don't know what that means. We don't know where it goes. We have high hopes, right? People will tell us all kinds of great shit to kind of pull us in one direction or another. But all of us are seeking, all of us are looking for something. All of us are trying to find that sense of completion, like, now I'm happy. Now I'm total and complete and whole and everything's just good. And then immediately the brain's like, yeah, but where are you going now? And there's that sense of lack again. And it's immediately there. And it's just, it's okay to do that. It's okay to dream. It's just the dream that you're envisioning as the path forward is not the reality that you're experiencing. It's just your way of interpreting the step you're on. Right? And it's really easy to get caught up in that. That's all. And I think it's really helpful to embrace the idea that all of your dreams, all of your visions of the future, your startup, your pension, your job, whatever it might be, it all turn to ash today. It'd all turn to nothing. And you would just be left with yourself. You would be left with what you are, which is what you've always been left with, regardless of your brain telling you differently, regardless of what the trajectory might be in your head. You're still just here now, and that's all you know. It's just that your brain, again, doesn't it doesn't jive with that. It's like, no, we know. Look at all the things we know. Here's a couple of options of things that could happen, and your brain can't help it. But again, it's recognizing that that's part of the journey, but that you're not actually seeing the journey.
Yeah, it always hits me when you say something like that or someone says something like that, that it's just you've never known. You've never been certain. You've never known where things are going. We've just so often convinced ourselves that we have. And I think I'm glad you brought up like the inevitable nature of having some sort of story. There's nothing, this conversation is not about never getting to a place where you never have a story and you're free of all thought completely. It's like, fuck all that shit. That's not what this is about. It's just the recognition that you never know where you're going. And yet our brain's going to settle upon where we think we should be going, where we want to go, and it's going to settle upon a destination. And it's almost like I'm picturing it like we have that destination, and there's either there's a spectrum in which how fuzzy that is or how clear it is. And a lot of people, clearly picture the destination. They're like, I have to get here. If I don't, then I'm not enough. If I don't, then I'm a failure. And they can do all of that and spend 3 hours a day envisioning it, picturing it. And it doesn't make it any more certain than if they didn't have that idea. And so it's just the recognition that how invested you get in that destination, in that need to be something, with that investment comes a spectrum of suffering that you're going to experience. And it's all on the table. It's all there. Like, there's nothing wrong with getting invested in that. That being said, there are inevitable repercussions to it. And so it's just maintaining a mindfulness of that perspective. Like, we're absolutely not saying like never get invested in a story, never want to get somewhere, never strive for things by any means. We have a business that we're operating. Like, we're going somewhere and we're taking steps, but we've maintained the recognition that if we get super invested in 5 years, we're going to be here. That's going to inevitably hinder us from being in the flow of things right now, from feeling free right now, from feeling less weight in each and every moment. As you settle upon those things, there's a buildup, there's a weight, inevitably, all the time. So that's the only thing we're expressing is get caught up in it, get lost in it, whatever. Just recognize there's going to be repercussions. There's going to be inevitable consequences. And it's weighing that all the time. It's recognizing I can get caught in this, because that's if you had the perspective that you couldn't get caught in it ever, you shouldn't get caught in it, you're not free. You're not free if you think that's not an option. Everything's an option all the time. Everything's always on the table. Get as fucking lost in the story as you possibly could. That's more freedom than having this perspective that you shouldn't, or you can't, or you can't, because then it comes in like that's still your perspective of yourself, because you're like, well, if I get lost in it, can I handle that? And that's a limitation on yourself. So freedom is like the willingness to step into that story, maintain that idea, and having the faith in yourself that you can maintain, that perspective and not get so lost in it that you never come back. And it's being willing to kind of have a foot in both worlds, but just understanding that the more seriously you take that story, the more of that experience of suffering and the more weight you're going to carry. The story always carries a weight, and the seriousness with which you take it is the amount of weight you're going to experience and that weight is perceived in different ways, it's experienced in different ways. So it's just maintaining that perspective, but also being willing to like not necessarily maintain that perspective. It's hard sometimes to get across. It's like there's nothing you have to do. It's just a recognition that there's going to be a degree of weight the more invested in that story you get, basically.
That's so interesting. It's there's nothing you have to do. You're already whole and complete. And in order to find that recognition, you are going to commit yourself to thinking you have to do things over and over and over again. You're going to emotionally invest in one journey after another, only to come to the recognition that the journey itself was never going to add value to you, but it did add experience. And it's so interesting that we're talking about the emotional cycle there. What we're talking about is, again, momentum, trying to get somewhere, investment in that, the excitement of that, the enthusiasm of that, and the fear of that failing, the fear of it not panning out, the fear of all of that. And then we get really, really committed to it. We figure, okay, I'm gonna keep going. It means something to me. And regardless, it changes as we go. But it's the level of emotional investment that really contributes to that feeling of the floor dropping out from under us when we recognize that it was never going to give us the thing that we promised ourselves it would. And so that drop, when all of a sudden it feels like you've lost everything, you're on your own again, you don't know what to do, you feel just fucking confused, and you just want to cry out to the universe, what the fuck? That's just because of the investment in the journey. And that's it. And that's okay. I think it's really important to recognize that that's okay if you recognize that you've been to that place. Like we've all been to that place, sitting on the floor, weeping because everything that we tried to fucking put our hands on turned to ash. We've all been there numerous times. And it's so interesting that if we don't recognize that we're strong enough to go through that, we commit even harder to the next journey. And that creates an even harder drop. And that's it, is that once we finish the journey or recognize that the journey was never going to do, again, what we convinced itself it would, that drop is the chance for us to come back down to ground level. We don't have to get back up on that chair. We don't have to commit to that trajectory completing us or fulfilling us. We don't, right? But that said, you can, and your brain really wants to. So just keep it in mind that there's going to be an emotional cycle to everything that you decide to get enthusiastic about, because your brain's immediately going to create some kind of a narrative out of it. And that's okay, as long as you recognize that that emotion will pass. Those emotions will pass. They will pass, and you will end up in another loop of enthusiasm and everything else. And that's what existence is. And that is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, regardless of how it might feel temporarily from moment to moment to moment. Because that's the thing, is that drop, that place that we always want to avoid, comes from pursuing the place we're always trying to get. So they go together. There's nothing wrong with that journey. You're strong enough. You really are. It's just that you may not think you're strong enough. Stop thinking about yourself while you're in it. Let it pass.
Exactly. Yeah. That drop, it's given me some interesting imagery. We've talked about the perspective of identity, like standing on a stool or a wobbly broken chair or whatever, but how willing we are to kind of make that drop back to ground level more frequently. It's almost like when you're going in and out of the story, kind of maintaining a foot in both worlds sort of thing. It's like stepping up on a step stool. It's like maybe 6 inches off the ground, where you're in the story, where it's not going to hurt to fall off. That drop is, you just step down and you're back. And it's like you're able to sort of maintain that because there's not a ton of investment. But then as you're on the stool, you see other people on higher stools. You're like, either you always have the perspective you can step down, you can let that go, or you can keep trying to climb higher and think that that's getting you somewhere. And so a lot of people will start getting higher. They're on maybe they go from a step stool to a chair, and then from a chair to a I don't know, bar stool, and then from that to like a 1-story building, and then from that to a 3-story building. I don't mean to get into like reference of jumping off a building by any means, but what I'm trying to, yeah, yeah, just to clarify. But what I'm trying to get across is like there is a inevitable drop to that continued investment in the story. And eventually, the more buildup you have, it's like the higher you get, that first story fall is going to hurt a lot more than stepping off a step stool. But as we're unwilling to step off on the smaller, from the smaller perspectives, that builds on itself. And eventually that drop is going to hurt a lot. You're probably going to, break some bones. You'll end up being okay until, you get to a point. And then it's also, and we've kind of had this, we've talked about this in the past, where people hit rock bottom and they either, if they continue on, if they survive hitting rock bottom, it can lead to, a lot of questioning. Like, wait, what if maybe the story I tell myself isn't the truth? Or, they go the other way and, their life ends basically. And so it's like this hitting rock bottom can go 2 different directions. And that's why so often people who come to this realization that they're not what they think they are, it's from hitting rock bottom, and they just happen to be someone who survives, because it's like the buildup of that story, whether it's positive or negative. We see it in society all the time. The people with the super positive story, at least from the external, the rich and famous, they hit rock bottom too, and that fall hurts so much because there was so much built upon that. They just kept climbing as opposed to stepping down, sort of checking themselves as they go, coming back to ground level, not realizing that, or when they realized that climbing higher doesn't actually make them more, because that's the funny thing is you have this perspective that you're higher up, but you're still you the whole time. Like, you're still just you here now, but you just have this perspective of yourself. But really, it's just because you're standing on a pile of identity. But if you know what I'm saying, like, you're still you standing there, and you think the whole thing is you, so it's making you more, but you're still just you. So whether you're standing on the ground or standing on the top of a mountain, you're still you. And it's just all the story that goes on top of that. So stepping down, staying on the ground, you're still you. There's just way more freedom. You're standing on a 5-foot tall stool. You can't go anywhere. And all you can do is maintain that and defend. People are trying to climb up the stool, and you're just, defending it, defending your story, defending your idea of yourself. And so there's so much, I don't know, I'm just going into this imagery here. There'll be a video around this at some point. Maybe it'll be me on a stool in some way. I'll figure that one out. Yeah, dueling with people below me, but that's it. Because when you're on the ground, it's pure freedom. You can go anywhere, do anything. You're still you. You know that being higher up doesn't mean anything about you, and even feeling like you're going lower doesn't mean anything about you. But it's the desire to maintain the story because you think that means something about you that it never actually does. And so, you can be willing to let that go. But anyway, where I started with this was just being willing, to step into the story is like stepping on a step stool, and it's not, that fall is not going to hurt. But as that continues to build, that eventual drop, and so many people just continue to avoid, the stepping down. So they keep stepping up. And it's not to say you get to a high point, you can't like take the stairs down. A lot of times that just isn't how it goes. But so you can get into the story, you can get into, the desires for things, whatever. And as long as you don't go too far into it, you can come back pretty easily without necessarily getting a bunch of broken bones and bruises. But it's, again, maintaining that sort of perspective of a willingness to step into it without fear, but also not thinking that it means something about you necessarily, because there's always going to be consequences to that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is just about embracing the journey. It's fun for me because I have a tendency of thinking about little little eternal loops in my head, just I don't know, as a mental exercise. I always find them kind of fun. And I was going through one just now as we've been having this conversation. So if you'd like to join me for this, we'll do this, and then we'll try and get to some of the questions that are being asked in the comment section. But anybody who'd like to listen, let's just close your eyes, and if it helps you to do so, you don't have to. If you can visualize with your eyes open, all the power to you. That's a good exercise too. So let's just erase the universe. Let's erase everything in existence. Let's erase all of it, and let's bring it down to just a small field that exists in potential. And in that field, there's just grass, and it's this really lush, dark, healthy type of grass, not grass like you've ever seen here on Earth. To call it grass is oversimplifying. It's quite literally just reality. It's the life of that whole goddamn field that's manifested as this kind of like hair, as these dendrils that can interact with reality around it and pull in air and light and all that stuff. And over the span of eternity, this field, this grass, stands forever. And as it is eternal, it learns to manifest itself in different ways. So instead of just being grass, it starts to grow a little flower. And then that flower dies, and it decides, well, that wasn't very hardy. I'm going to try and create something else. So it creates a slightly larger flower, but this flower's got extra petals, so it can pull in more light and more oxygen and all that. And so the field is really just experimenting with itself over and over, getting invested in all of these different journeys to become a different form. And eventually it gets tired of that form, or the form gets pushed to its limit and the form dies, and it goes back to the grass. And the grass, like, let's do that again. And so over an eternity, I want you to just imagine this grass and this field being perfectly flat, but just over and over, little bits of it just manifesting in larger and larger clumps, and more complication, kind of existing for a bit and then wilting and going back into the ground and then popping back up. And over eternity, this plant gets so complex that now, when it's growing out of the ground, it has hands and a face, and it's forming a body. And it doesn't have to be a body that you and I would imagine. Let's just say it's a body made of grass. Let's just say that it is in fact a little green dude that's now popping out of the ground and is able to walk around its own field and experiment with itself a little bit more. And that's kind of fun. But then it thinks, there's another direction here. Up. There's a sky up there. I wonder if there's anything up there. And it starts to excite its imagination because it's the unknown. It's something that's so different from the reality it knows as being the grass and all the forms that it's learned how to take. And so it starts to build a ladder out of itself. And it gets very excited about this ladder, and it climbs the ladder, and not recognizing that it can fall now, it does. And it falls and it hurts itself. And it decides, well, that's a stupid idea. I'm going to leave that ladder alone. Kind of tears it down. Continues playing the field, maybe takes a few other forms, gets a little bit more complicated, but eventually starts looking up again. Wonder if I can make a better ladder. So it starts to work on a better ladder, and it climbs it again, only to fall a little farther this time, maybe get a little bit more hurt. That's not going to stop it though. It's just going to keep going. And so it does. And eventually it starts building a ladder so high, the danger is so great. And yet the alternative is to just remain on the field. And so it does it. And it falls from this incredible height, and it hits the ground, and its whole form just gets obliterated. And there's nothing left now except this empty field and this isolated ladder that nobody's using. And then all of a sudden, the grass forms again. That little face comes back up, and it's like, no, I'm not doing that. And it sits on the ground, maybe it makes a fire, chills out, enjoys the sunrise. But eventually it starts looking back up at the sky and wondering if it can build another ladder, because what's the worst that could happen? It ends up back on the ground as the ground forever.
Oh man, I was deep into that one there. I appreciate that a lot. Because that's it, right? That's what's the harm? You're eternal. You're here forever. Eventually, yeah, you can come up with anything. And this is the perspective I really enjoy, and this is what I'm starting to see more and more. Like through, and I think I expressed this about a month ago, like through recognizing that nothing can actually add value to you, it's like you come full circle, like the person, like the you know manifestation of a human type character as the grass. And it's like, yeah, they can do anything. They chill, they hang, they do anything, and eventually it's just like over enough, give it enough time in eternity, like, well, that's something else I could do. That's an option. And that's what it becomes. It's like you let go of everything, or just not even let go, but recognize that there's nothing that is going to add to you because you're already everything. And like we were talking about last week, as soon as you think there's something that can add to you, you're back in the story, and you're not, you don't have that recognition that you're inherently whole and complete as you are. But once you do see that more clearly, once you recognize that you're just the eternal now, like eternally here now, as what is, as reality, whether it's, as Andrew or Ray or whatever, or just you are the here and now, like everything kind of comes back on the table. It's like, well, this is something I can do. Well, let's get lost in the story. Let's fuck around and take it really seriously for a bit. But it's because you are eternal, and that's kind of what we're going through. It's just we've gone so far in that direction, like we've forgotten. And I don't even know, like, do you, because I feel like I haven't really heard you use the term forgot ever. So I'm curious your perspective, because, and I say everything tongue in cheek, basically, but that forgetting, it's not that we've forgotten, because it's not that we've left anything. It's just our investment in a certain mentality has gotten us to a place where it's gotten harder to maintain that perspective, or realize that there's really nowhere to get. And real quick before we get into the forgetting thing, I had one of the conversations I was having was a friend asked, about my, like, you seem like you have a lot of conviction with everything you're talking about, and yet you also talk about uncertainty so much. Like, how do you have that sort of confidence with what you're saying, but also maintain the uncertainty? And eventually I came to the point, and I'll come at this from so many different directions, and eventually get to like, okay, that was a clearer way of saying that I could have gotten to, but that's the fun in it, because might as well, right? So eventually I got to the recognition, and I told him, like, the only thing you can confirm right now, we were driving, is that you're here now. What that means differs, but that's the only thing that you can possibly confirm. So when I'm talking about everything, it's coming from that perspective. And the reason that I get pushback, that people will say, oh, how do you know? It's like, because that's all anyone can confirm, and everyone's settling upon an answer outside of that. It's like, well, maybe this, maybe that. Again, maybe anything, but what do you know? You know that you're here now, and that's it. Really, that's it. Like, outside of that, I cannot confirm with absolute certainty that the universe exists outside of this room, like what I can perceive, what I can see. And yet we settle upon so many stories and ideas. So that's where the conviction comes from. And then just that continued process of questioning. We have a lot of things to point to just having this conversation so much. But so anyway, so with the coming back to the forgetting, I'm curious your perspective on that point of view, because it's like, with everything, kind of yes and no, both and neither. It's like forgetting is a term, again, just a word to point to the recognition that most people don't see what this is, because they want that certainty. But anyway, yeah, I'm just curious your perspective on that term, and that sort of coming at things from that point of view.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not so much just forgetting so much as distraction, I think, to a large degree, because all we're ever recognizing is what we already are. which is where we came from. That was the thing I think we talked about last week in terms of being children and the beginning of the path in terms of object permanence and all that stuff. This is all we've ever been doing, is trying to cope with the reality that we're all we know. It's just over time we've latched on to so many assumptions and so many stories and so many beliefs of other people that we've almost forgotten that we don't know. We've almost forgotten that there is a reality that we're kind of avoiding. And it's just because we piled so many things on top of so many other things over so many years that, it's the same reason that adults have a really hard time relating to younger children. And it's because we've spent so long telling ourselves what we are that we don't recognize that we're still what they are. We're still completely uncertain. We're still figuring shit out moment to moment. We still don't know what anything is. We are just existing and doing our best to figure that out from moment to moment. And so when it comes to the question of like, how are you so certain? It's the same thing as Socrates, and knowing that I know nothing, like all I'm certain about is that if I grasp onto any truth, I have stopped learning what is actually happening. And that is always the case. Universally, as soon as I grab onto a concept and I go, that's the truth, I have stopped questioning everything that got me up to that concept. Who's to say there's not more beyond it? But that's what I don't like. That's what I don't like. No, there's got to be some place that is just, this is it. And it's like, nope, because you're it. And you keep going. So you don't stop. Your existence never stops. And yet your mind is trying to come to a point where you're like, now I know what existence is. But your existence, which means knowing what existence is being existence. So there's nothing to conceptually know. It's just this ongoing experience. That's what it is. And so that I know. I know that I can't know that in the conceptual sense. But I can continue to develop more sensitivity for its nuance and its gray area. I can continue to understand more about it. I can continue to hone my clarity in terms of what it is I'm looking at in that existence. That's true. But I can't do any of that so long as I'm desperate for something to settle on.
Yeah, I really like that. Like this is it. Sorry. That idea, if you, because we're always looking for something to point to and be like, oh, this is it, this is the answer, this is it. You can't be looking for something that and to point to like, this is it, this is the truth, this is something I settle upon, because you're always it. So there's that sort of always that dichotomy between this is it versus you're it. If something else is it, you can't be it. If you're it, then you recognize that there's nothing else that's it besides everything. And that whole division between you and everything kind of begins to melt away. But and that's the real paradox, is that we have the idea that, it's something else. It's something you can know, but you're the one knowing what is known is what it is. So you can't know yourself because that's something external. And so it's something that isn't what the knower is, like the knower is that which is known. So it can't be a conceptual idea. It's just something that it is. You can't point to it because the finger pointing is the thing. Just like Alan Watts has used a lot of metaphors in this vein, just like, fire can't burn itself, a finger can't point to itself, tongue can't taste itself. That's the paradox there, is you can't say what it is because the words and the sayer are all sort of it, but it's never what you think. Because as soon as it becomes a conceptual idea of, well, I now know what it is because I know that it's this thing and everything, like we're still able to conceptualize that. And so it's such a fine line between being willing to have the conversation and talk about it, but know that you can't say it. And so there has to be, it's almost like, and you've said this a bunch, how language can't really get you there. It's almost like this layer. I don't know, I'm seeing it like a layer below, where it's like you recognize that, yes, none of the words are it, but they also are it, but they're not. Your idea of what it is isn't it. It's like your idea of air isn't the air you breathe. And so it can't be just words. There has to be an underlying sensitivity, understanding to it. And that's what makes the conversation both so difficult if you're bringing weight into it, if you're trying to get somewhere, but through recognizing that, this is just it. This is the process. How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to spend eternity? Might as well do this. So it's not difficult unless you bring a desire to get somewhere into it. And without that, then it's just kind of fun working on different ways to get it across, working on different ways to express it, but also not feeling a need to. And that's why we can talk about anything on here. We talk about literally any topic we want on here. A lot of it circles around some quote unquote deeper recognitions, or just, coming back to uncertainty, basically. Not even deeper. It's just the reality of uncertainty. That's why it comes back to that, but it's not somewhere we have to get. So it's just an interesting thing to explain, to try and explain, because even that, it has to be a conversation. It can't just be, yeah, this is it. We can do our best to say certain things, but we're so used to conceptualizing things and just wanting, a clear-cut answer, that it almost has to be a progressive conversation, because that's what reality is. It's never what you point to. It's always just what you are in each and every moment.
Yeah, to the point where I find it really funny because, and I understand this whole comment is going to set off a bunch of people. The Big Bang Theory is a theory. See, it's all theory at the end of the day. It's just us going, but it's gotta. That's really it. It's just us going, no, but there has to be a beginning, because, this is objectively reality. I'm here in this body on this planet, and therefore there's time, and therefore everything that led to, and all of it is us just going, no, that's got to be real. No, it's absolutely what my brain is coming up with. It's got to be. Look, I've got people behind me backing that shit up with equations and shit, and it's like, right, until we change one thing, and that equation means nothing. But it feels really fucking good, right? It feels real fucking good to have an explanation for what this is, But the reality is, the sad, fun reality is the fact that it's all just theory. The only thing that is absolutely true is you. Not your idea of you, your existence. That is true. You exist. What you and exist means are questionable. But the reality of what I'm pointing to is the case. You are the case. That is all this is about. It's not, but how and why and where's it going? And you can do all of that. You can build as many goddamn ladders as you want. The reality is that you are still the field. The reality is that you have always been. And you're going, well, that's not the case. Tell me one time that you can remember where you haven't been.
And that is why people go running for the hills, because it all comes back to that every time. Like, it's fun to have the conversation. It's an enjoyable way to spend eternity, but everyone's trying to cling on to something outside of the recognition that you exist. You are here now. What those words mean, even trying to build an idea of that, isn't it. Like, it's nothing beyond that. Like, that's all you can say. You're like, that can't be. It must be more. There must be something else. There has to be a greater. There has to be another thing. You know, it can't be eternal. It can't be infinite. And there's no thing that you can settle upon with absolute certainty ever, besides just that you are, that you exist. And it's not even like, and that's the tough part for people too. It's not the idea of you, just you. Well, what am I? That's a good question. You want to chat? You want to have a conversation? That's sort of it, because it's, even no one's going to be able to say what you are. They can tell a story, they can make up a concept, they can come up with an idea, but that still isn't it. The description's not the described ever. And we've gotten so caught in the idea that it can be described that we don't recognize anymore just how raw that is, how fucking raw. And it's funny, we're saying this on a raw episode, and it makes sense because I came up we came up with the name just kind of like, oh yeah, it'll be more, we're not editing it. It'll be, we didn't, I don't think we even had the perspective that it would be more off the cuff. It was just, they weren't going to be edited. They were live streams that we were just going to throw on there. So they're raw. They're unedited, untouched, but really, like, reality is raw. Like, existence is raw.
No lube.
No lube. Oh yeah. Just raw dogging the shit out of reality. And that's what, yeah, there's another dualistic unity phrase. Yeah, dualistic unity, raw dog in reality, because there's nothing you can settle upon. It's just that. It's just raw, just fucking bare bone in the reality of it, but not in the experience of it. And I think that's very important, because people can get caught in thinking, oh, well, this is kind of a dry conversation. It's like, so that's just it. What? That's the end of it. And it's like, that's the end of the truth of it. But there's a whole lot of experience that can be had, and your ability or your willingness to not settle upon something within the experience as being it will allow you to remain free. As soon as you settle upon something, it's like you add it to you, and that's now a weight. You're not free anymore. So it's maintaining that recognition without attaching to thinking, and it's not even not attaching, it's just not thinking that it means anything about you, because as soon as it goes from you exist, you are here now, to you are this, you have this, you mean this, you have this amount of value, you're back in the illusion. That's not just you exist. And that's the extent, because then you start building a story, you start building an idea, and then there's the weight and all of that. So yeah, you can't say with certainty anything outside of that. And that's where, it starts to get fun exploring that, because there's no way to confirm that this isn't just a dream, and a dream is just a word, but that this isn't, a salvia trip or something. You cannot confirm that. And that makes people run too, because they want to be able to, and they'll just write it off. I've had a couple conversations where we've gotten to that point where I'm like, you can't really confirm that this isn't just a dream right now, right? And people will either kind of push back, or they'll just kind of write it off. And then there's very few that are willing to be like, yeah, I guess I can't. I guess I can't.
Now that's interesting, because why? Why do we avoid that? Why do we avoid that recognition outside of how invested we are in all of this other shit? Because a number of people have said that to me. It's like, yeah, well, if that's the case, why am I paying taxes? Well, that's a damn good question. Why are you paying taxes? Have you stopped to actually ask yourself, why are you doing any of this shit outside of your fervent belief that it is exactly what you perceive it to be? Because that's it. I mean, how do we get roped into these careers that last a lifetime but require us to give up our enthusiasm or give up our passions? through some promise that in the future you'll be secure if you tie yourself to this job. And that's not the case. It's all just fictional. It's all just false certainty again, right? But we get roped into this. And that's the problem, is we get roped into an idea of what is and what will always be, and then we invest accordingly. And so when somebody comes along and goes, yeah, but what if that's not the case? We're like, shut that fucker up. I'm really invested in this. Look, I've gotten my third raise in the last 3 years. Very shortly, someone's going to love me, that kind of thing. And we get really, really into whatever narrative we feel is going to make us complete. And that's, again, where that fall comes from. I wanted to stop for a brief moment because, it's funny. We go on these talks and we just kind of spin out in whatever direction that we're spinning out. But we always kind of revolve very close to the point of everything, in my opinion. So although it may not sound like it, we are actually addressing a number of questions at the moment, if one has the wherewithal and the desire to kind of suss it out. And so what I mean is that, like, we had a question here. Any tips on how to be more present, not focus or stress on future events? Example, planning for travel, jobs, tasks that are building up, currently in a situation where things like this need to be done day to day. So we just answered all that without actually addressing any of it. We've been saying the journey doesn't mean anything about you. And that applies to everything that was just asked there. The journey doesn't mean anything about you. Doesn't take away from your value. If you fuck it up, it doesn't mean that you are fucked for the rest of your life. The journey doesn't mean anything about you. What you do with here and now means something about you. How much of a priority is that? Because that's really the question. Is your relationship with the here and now enough of a priority for you to stop focusing on your image of yourself? Because that's the question. Do you give enough of a fuck about your life to be in it? Because often we're not. Often we're so wrapped up in trying to feel better about how we're doing in life that we're so totally focused on this fiction of how we're doing that we fuck up everything else. And then worse, we take those fuck ups and we think about it, making it that much worse. But that's it. Your journey doesn't mean anything about you. Take away the idea that your value is going to fluctuate one way or another. It doesn't matter if you go into work and wear the wrong shirt. It doesn't matter if you lose your job. It doesn't matter if you've lost your apartment. It doesn't matter if the person you've been with for fucking a decade leaves you. It doesn't matter. None of that shit matters about your value or your potential. Ever. Ever. What it does do is change the shit you got to go through from one moment to the other. It changes the considerations, but not your value. And you could say, well, if I lose everything, then obviously I have less value. Not unless you stop moving and stop breathing. See, that's the whole thing. You could lose everything right now, and in the next moment, have an insight that leads you to build something else that you would have never discovered if you were still attached to the thing you just lost. If that's the case, then your potential had nothing to do with losing things and everything to do with what you do next, what you do now. Okay, so it's never this giant fucking risk that our brain makes it out to be like, oh, God, if Gladys in accounting is mad at me, what am I going to do? Fuck Gladys. She's got her own shit to worry about. That's the whole thing. She's coming down on you because she's concerned about not being enough. You see, it's this vicious fucking cycle. And we don't have to keep doing it. It's just the recognition that doesn't stop it from sucking. Like, understanding that your value doesn't raise or lower doesn't mean you don't go through the experience of perceiving that to be the case. You're still going to go through it. But remind yourself, right, that's part of the journey, right? That's the duality of all of this. I can't get invested in a journey without there also being some fear of it failing, right? That's just part of the journey. But the worst that could happen is you come back to ground level.
All said. I'm fucking ready to rock and roll after that. I like that rant right there. That was fun. But it's funny because at the start of that, you said the only thing that means anything about you is here now. Like, here and now means something like about you. And it's like, in the sense, because immediately people are going to hear that and it's like, okay, so my experience means something about me. And it's like, no, the fucking rawness of that, the extent of that is the here and now. Because as soon as the here and now, your experience means something about anything that isn't also here now, it's the story. It's okay, so I have this idea of myself that's not here now, and this means something about that. And it's like, no, it's here and now. It's are you willing to prioritize this and that being the extent of what is? It's not this for that. It's not this to inform that. It's not this in order to build something else. It's not a means to an end. It's a means in itself. This is the means. This is the end, here and now. That's it. So it really always comes down to your mentality, like your willingness for this to be it and the freedom in this state. Because as soon as, the worries, anxious feelings and come up, you're not prioritizing here and now. You're not just here and now. You're invested in a story. And it's not to say that I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't feel those things. We're always, not always, but there's some aspect of a story coming along with us for the most part. But that's what leads to those types of feelings. Where you're not prioritizing your experience here now because you're invested in an idea that's being built, in the future, where it's going, what things are leading to. But we never really know where any of that is leading to. And the thing I thought of when it's like the prioritizing and, Gladys in accounting, fuck Gladys in accounting, all that stuff is the recognition that if you were alone, if you are, but alone, on a deserted island or something, like if you built some, raft or something and then it all fell apart, would you get so concerned with what it means about you, or would you just go back to finding a better way to build the raft? And would you recognize that, okay, I did all that, but I learned a lot along the way. Now you have coming at it from a completely new perspective. And that was not a failure. It was just, as Ray said before, like first step towards success or a step on the path to finding the best raft. So it really is, our comparison, our perspective of being something among other people that have certain thoughts or that we think have certain thoughts about stuff that gets in the way. Because without that, then you're just going through it. You're willing to try making the raft 100 different ways, 100 different times. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything about your value. You're just doing it to do it in order to explore other things. And that's always how it is, though. It's always that. We've just gotten so invested in believing that we're building something on top of what is here and now that we think that means something about us, because we get caught. Like I had this insight a couple of days ago. I'm going to film a video about it at some point, but like the coming at it from the perspective that you're good at everything eventually. And it's just really, and this is still coming from the movie Arrival and everything that came of that, like future, the things you're going through now are informing your quote unquote future self or whatever. You don't know what you're going to pull from this current experience. And there's so many things in our past we look at, but the recognition that you're good at everything eventually, because, and maybe not necessarily the best in the world, but given enough time and attention, you could be very good. And it's really like, what's getting in the way of that? If you think of certain things that you're quote unquote bad at, how much evidence do you really have of that? Were you bad at it? Maybe 10 times, maybe not even, maybe 5 times, maybe just fucking once. How many things do you say, oh, I'm bad at this because you did it once and it didn't go as well as you thought? You weren't as good as the person next to you who had done it 5,000 times. And so now you're bad at it. And you have almost no evidence whatsoever of that, of being able to say, I am bad at this. So it's really just the story. Like all the things you think you're bad at is just you stopping somewhere along the path of becoming really good at something. And then you settled. It was too much. It was like, oh, I can't keep going because maybe I'll fail again. When you recognize it doesn't mean anything about you, it's just the process. There's no way to get really good at anything by, it's so rare that you get good at something and you are good at it the first time you try it. It happens here and there. Someone just tries it and they're like, oh, they have a natural tendency towards it, whatever. But it's usually, what people don't realize, it's usually because they did other things that were similar or involved in a certain component of that, like picking up a sport and being really good at it at first. Like maybe you played other sports that were very similar to that and you have some sort of predisposition, but everyone settles at a certain point along this trajectory. You don't know what it's going to look like necessarily, but it's getting somewhere. And the more time and attention you put into that, you're going to get to a place that you're, I guess, better at it than you are now. And so the things that you're bad at was just you stopping and then building a certainty around that this is part of my story. I'm bad at this. You're not. You just had a couple experiences that didn't meet your expectations, and then it became part of your story, and then you were never willing to try it again. And that's it. You're not actually objectively bad at anything. You've just tried some things once or twice, didn't go as well as you thought, and now it's part of your story. But that doesn't mean that you're bad at it. You don't have to tell yourself that story. You can let go of that idea, but through that, you have to be willing to let go of all the other certainty you hold on to about yourself. But it doesn't mean it is certain. Never. Just because you tell yourself a story doesn't mean it's true.
On so many levels. Do you want to have a little fun?
Always.
All right, cool. First thing, I'm going to make a quick announcement down to brass tacks. Sorry, I got to do the human thing. Our Colorado mini retreats are officially sold out. There are no tickets left. However, we have another mini retreat coming up on August 24th in Vermont. This is going to be near Manchester. Mountainside. It's fucking gorgeous. It looks really, really nice. There are a total of 11 tickets available in Vermont. I believe 5 of them are already gone, if not 6. They are only available to tier 3 supporters on Patreon at the moment. I don't know if it's going to make it to tier 2. I do want to say, I recognize the last 2 events sold out really quickly. It is worth it to be a tier 3 supporter if you can afford to do so. You get a bunch of merch. You get a free one-on-one with Andrew or myself right from the start. Like it's definitely worth it. And we give you a shout out in the credit roll of all of our video episodes. It helps a lot, I guess what I'm saying. And you get a $350 discount on all of our retreat tickets, whether it's here in the States or it's going to be in the Netherlands or the Australia retreat, which is coming in 2024. We have a lot of shit coming. And again, we know we're selling these out really fast. So we're going to come up with more and more ways to have more and more events that are different, like not just events like retreats where you get to spend several days just kind of with us hanging out, because I'm not going to lie, that's kind of my favorite thing to do is hang out with the community. I just love fucking hanging with people and talking about this stuff. It's great. But being able to do maybe music festivals or a comedy night or something like that, like we're going to figure out stuff like that. And last announcement, with all of that in mind, as Andrew was saying, we do kind of plan a little bit. And by plan, I mean, we do shit day to day. And then we look back and go, wow, look at all the shit that happened. And then we write it all down. And so we've created a business plan as such by looking at all the shit we've already done and kind of went like, and if that keeps going, imagine. So we are actually looking for investors, and we'll be doing a presentation at the end of May and in early June based on our, I guess, lack of fucking ceiling when it comes to what Dualistic Unity can do with your help, with everybody here, with all of the attention that we're giving this conversation. Like it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And it's been fucking almost entirely organic up until now. So if you're interested in investing, this is not a donation. This would be investing in a company with an ROI. There's a whole thing. Just go to dualisticunity.com/invest. And there's a form there, and you can just let us know that you are interested. Tell us a little bit about why and maybe how much you're looking. And then we will get in touch with you with the details for that webinar or for that presentation. And we'll run you through all the weird shit that we've been thinking about. Okay, that's all done. So now back to the fun. There was a great question here, and it goes back to making assumptions, as we always do. So how might we make the most of dimensions? Now, this is admittedly one of the funniest fucking things that I think has developed in the spiritual community over the last like 10 years. This idea of like 4D and 5D and all that shit. And I find it really, really funny because it really just comes back down to the assumption that you know what the fuck is going on, because you don't. And so here's my point. So many people are being like, oh, we're trapped in the 3D. We're trapped in the 3D, which sounds like a lot of an assumption, doesn't it? It's like I'm experiencing 3 dimensions. Yeah, okay. You're experiencing 3 dimensions. And time, you're experiencing time as a 3-dimensional character? Absolutely. All that said, where do your dreams happen? Do they happen here in the 3D? Or do you perceive them through 3D? Because of course you do. Right? That all said, does your dream have a start and an end, or do you just look at it that way? So the entirety of whatever dream you might just have, you experience it from start to finish. But the whole fucking thing already exists in potential within you. So why didn't you start at the end instead of at the beginning? You could have. You have that option, but you don't think that way. So you put it in linear time according to what you're used to, but it only existed in potential, which means all of that is self-imposed. The idea that it exists anywhere in 3 dimensions is self-imposed by you. None of that means anything. We're not in dimensions. We experience dimensions. They're all just you, perceived in a slightly different way. Right? So if you want to access dimensions, stop trying. Stop trying to think about other dimensions like they're anywhere other than here. It's just that you perceive this as 3-dimensional. There's so much more to it. There's so much more to it. And you know that just by the vast spectrum of shit that exists, quote unquote, within you. And yet when you experience something within you, it doesn't feel like it's within you. It feels like it's you, because there's no within and no without. And therefore there's no dimensions, just the experience of them.
Yeah, it's just another way to avoid that recognition that you're here now. There must be. We're going somewhere. Must be another dimension I can tap into. I've experienced other dimensions that aren't here now. Did you have the perspective of not being here now when you were perceiving it? No, you were still here now. And even in a dream, when you have a dream, you have the idea that, you're going through this whole experience. You're going through this trajectory, but your body, you're perceiving it. And even in your imagination, be it, I don't know, there's definitely some connection with everything, but with dreams and imagination, it's very similar kind of experience you can have, but you're, laying in your bed, sleeping, you're here now, you're not moving through this sort of, your idea of you that's rooted in, the body and everything, like your perception of your body isn't moving anywhere. You're here now perceiving this dream. And so with the idea of a start and the end, or just the experience that you're having in the dream, you're experiencing time and space because you believe that to be the truth of what's happening. Like there's so much settled upon with the idea of experiencing alternate dimensions. It's coming at it from the perspective that those are separate somehow. It's just that avoidance, coming back to what we were saying before. You exist. That's the extent. You are here now. That's the extent of what you can possibly confirm. That makes us uncomfortable. We want there to be something else, because if there's something else, then it isn't just us. If it's not something else, then it's just you. And so we're always trying to avoid that, thinking that we have this idea that we have to get somewhere. We have to ascend. We need this trajectory because we don't feel like our experience here now is enough. So we have to come up with these ideas that we're getting somewhere. And every time we step into that, comparison, judgment, all of that mentality comes in, because as soon as you're someone who's, getting the world to fucking 4D or 5D or helping people get there. It's like you're able to build yourself up. And then as you do that, you're not just what is, you're not whole and complete, you're getting somewhere. And so it's almost symbolic. Anytime we think there's something else like the world getting to 5D, it's really just you wanting yourself to get to somewhere, and how well you understand that, how well you get people to that spot, how well you feel like you're getting humanity to that spot is really just you and your trajectory getting somewhere. You're feeling better depending upon how well you think you're performing in this made up idea that you're getting somewhere that isn't here now. And like that's the extent. And people will even having this conversation, they'll admit like, okay, yeah, I'm here now, but I'm here now going somewhere like that isn't here now. When you get there, are you not going to be here now? Like, well, I'm still going to be here. Yeah, exactly. Because as soon as the trajectory is built, there's the idea that there's something that isn't here now, that there's a place that we can be that isn't here now. And coming back to that, it's raw, it's uncertain, can be uncomfortable, but that is the reality of things. And that's how you maintain that freedom. Because as soon as you build a trajectory, as soon as you build an idea of you getting somewhere, it's like you're, whether you want to admit it or not, believing that there's somewhere that isn't here now. There's a place to get other than where you're at. And that's it. You can't escape it. You can't get anywhere else. There's no you that exists outside of the here and now. So it's interesting because there's always that underlying component to the thoughts of, even the thoughts of coming to Earth, things like that, choosing to come to Earth. It's like coming from where? Coming from somewhere that isn't here now? Well, no, exactly. It's always that. Any ideas we hold on to, heaven, you're trying to get to heaven, afraid of going to hell. When you experience those, would they not be here now? Oh, yeah, I guess. But in your head, it's an idea, quote unquote, in your head. It's just an idea that we maintain, a trajectory, an idea of somewhere existing that isn't here now, but it always is. So through recognizing that no matter where you get, you're still you here now, you exist, it has to come back to your mentality here and now. There isn't so much an ability to avoid that. And so through that, you realize that this is everything. This is eternity right here, right now. How willing am I to face that, admit that, deal with that, ponder that? And through that, you can be free, but it's also, it's the back and forth. It's the getting lost in it as well, or building a story because it's something to do, but it doesn't mean anything about you, and you're not getting anywhere. You have to maintain a conceptual idea in order to think that there's anywhere that isn't here now, because that's it.
It's kind of funny though, because it's kind of like when people on the spiritual path for the first couple of years suddenly come to the recognition that there's an awareness to become more aware of, and all of a sudden everybody else is a fucking NPC. Everyone else who doesn't get it, it's an NPC. And so I always find that to be an interesting transition phase. But the same is kind of true when it comes to this conversation about dimensions. And what I mean is that it always comes from the perspective of somebody who's fairly new to the path of insanity. And what I mean is that we get so very caught up in thinking about the world through our very typical vanilla three-dimensional kind of perspective of being a meat bot on a rock floating through space, that as soon as we disconnect from that and have any degree of an experience that's not locked into that perspective of where we are in the world, like as soon as we're okay, so here's a good example. People who experience out-of-body travel for the first time, or astral travel for the first time. Oh my God. You listen to those fuckers just go off about, geez, wow, the universe. Oh, we can go anywhere. Oh my God, dimensions and all this stuff. And it's just like, all you did was use your goddamn imagination without like immediately pegging it to your story. Like all you did was just let go a little bit of what you think you are. You saw something else that's in you, and you went, I went somewhere else. There's nowhere else. You're still here. You've always been here and now. It's just your experience of what that meant changed. It just changed. But the only reason it changed is because you're so attached to your current perspective of what things are. You're white knuckling 3 dimensions, as it were. But you've always had the ability to experience other dimensions, quote unquote. When you were a kid running around trying to avoid the lava, what do you think you were doing? And yet it's funny because we don't look at it that way, right? But to us as kids, that was absolutely fucking real, right? Because we were in it. That was our subjective experience, right? Well, what were you doing there if not having kind of one foot in the quote unquote real and one foot in the other, right? In the subjective. That's all it is. It's just that we've lost that ability because now we're like, no, this is real. And everything in here is just made up. It's like, no, everything in there is everything that could ever be.
Yeah, because that shift, we've gotten so caught in, yeah, you have to maintain this idea that this is real in order to feel like this drastic shift. And then we attach to that and think because we're coming at it from a divided perspective, from believing our idea of ourselves to be the truth, that as soon as we experience that, we're like, oh, well, this means something about me. This means I'm improving, understanding more, whatever. And that's the base when you don't build an idea. Like we keep building things on top of it. So we get a view of, the sort of baseline of just reality of the experience. And it's like, oh, this isn't what I thought. Oh, this must mean this. And then it means something. And then it's not, you're not just in it. You're not just doing it in a state of freedom. As soon as it means something, you're not really free anymore. But it's funny to see that. And even because for myself, like I am still kind of in that spot of like, I don't think, not to say that it's ever going to go away, the awe of things and the awesomeness by any means, but I'm still very much, there's lots of things where even an out of body experience or lucid dreaming, like I was talking about it last week, how I was sitting still, and through that I realized like I kind of had, I don't know if I would call it an out of body experience. I don't know. People label everything and it's like, yeah, it's an experience. It's out of body is just another phrase you can use to try and describe it. But it was like I could feel myself, whatever that is, not Andrew, just the here and now, shifting around, like experiencing the here and now and from a different perspective than that. Because as that shifts, like you recognize that you're everything in infinite eternity. Like there's so much more to this experience. Like there is, but there isn't. Like it's still experience here and now. And it's just because we've settled upon a specific experience of here and now being real, building an idea of that perspective, that it feels so drastically different. But we've really just settled upon a very limited perspective of being reality, of being existence, that now anything outside of that, any sort of quote unquote trippy experience feels like this crazy thing, but it's still you here now. Always that perspective. So it's interesting that only because we've gotten so caught in settling upon this being real, do things like, oh, ascending to 5D, oh, alternate dimensions, oh, astral projection, oh, traveling, things like that, have become this thing that people use to build more of an idea of themselves. And that's where it comes back to. And then it almost can separate them even more. There's no experience that like enlightens you by any means. It's just an opportunity to see things differently and see that, and basically to recognize that this isn't what you think. This isn't, that settling upon this as being quote unquote real, and this being the only thing that's real isn't it. So any of those things are opportunities to see that, but those opportunities can happen at any point in any moment, just from recognizing that the story you tell yourself isn't the reality of you and your willingness to explore that. It can be anything. And I think, like, astral projection, something like that, an out of body experience, and near death experience are opportunities to see that. But people get caught in thinking that that is the thing itself, as opposed to just an opportunity, like a crack, where if you're willing to explore it, then you can dig a little deeper. But they're all just opportunities to get that perspective shift.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I just want to reiterate this very, very quickly, that often having this conversation about, dimensions and all of that only happens with somebody who still perceives themselves to be in a universe as opposed to being the universe, because that changes the entire conversation, right? Like the line that we have on some of our merch, that the universe you're aware of is your awareness, that turns the entire conversation about 3 and 4 and 5D up on its ass. At the end of the day, it really does. And or any dimensions or astral travel or anything, it changes the entire fucking conversation, because it comes back down to the very important point. You don't know this exists anywhere outside of you, of your awareness. You don't know. What you know is that you are interacting with something that you are interpreting, and that you're interacting, therefore, with your interpretation more than the something, which might mean that you're only interacting with your interpretation of what you are, and that there is no actual something that you're experiencing at all. It's just the perception of one.
Yeah, that thought sort of came across me a number of times, but even just on a walk, saying like, I am moving, like, yes and no, like, who's moving what exactly? And then it just like shot me sort of like and that's just it. Cause I had settled upon the idea of, I'm Andrew moving, but it was almost like a who's moving Andrew. And like, you can say like my arm is moving, but who's doing the moving? And that's it. Like, you can't really settle upon that. And that's where I think cognitive dissonance comes in very quickly. And you're just like, oh, I'm moving my arm, whatever. Shut up. Stop being like that. But if you explore that, like, wait a second, what is moving this? Because if the arm is the movement happening here and now, there's not this external, it's not that you are moving it, because you are it. And so it's just something happening. And that's the same with all of the quote unquote, I've been using so many fucking air quotes in this one, the internal experience that you're having, your heart beating, your food digesting, even the breath. That's something that happens outside of your idea of yourself. But when you start exploring that recognition, like, who exactly is doing the movement or doing the talking, people settle upon, oh, it's I don't even know. They'll come up with a conceptual idea of that. But without that, then it's like you're it doing all of it, happening to you, as you, from you. And there's like that division just kind of ceases to be so much. And that can get people, I don't know, in a state where they can start getting very concerned, and you can start getting that sort of abyss type feeling, that void type feeling, because there isn't so strong of a perception between you separate from anything. And that sense of control starts to slip a bit. But then you come back to the recognition that you're still here now. What that means, I don't know what the fuck that means. I have no fucking idea what that means, because like, I can't say what I am. I can't ever. And if there's concern with that, then it can send you spiraling, trying to figure it out. But then simultaneously realizing that you can't, then you can either continue spiraling into that, or you can just relax. Like, well, or I can just be here now, or I can just continue on the same way I have for so long without trying to come up with a conceptual idea, without needing to maintain a conceptual idea of what's happening here and trying to settle upon something, because that's always going to distort it. It's happening, conceptual idea or not.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a fun episode. I really enjoyed this. I wasn't sure where we were going to go, and as always, I mean, I just wanted to mention very, very quickly to everyone that we're going to be continuing for another 2-hour group discussion shortly after this. We're going to take about a 15-minute break here in about 8 minutes, and then we'll be continuing on Patreon, patreon.com/dualistic unity. It is a tier 1 conversation today, so for only $5 a month, you can chat with us 2 or 3 times a week on Mondays. This would be one of our groups. And so it's always a lot of fun. If you haven't joined us, it gives you a chance to be on the screen with us and to have a conversation with a bunch of other members of the community in a private setting, because Patreon, none of what we discuss on Patreon becomes publicly available. So you can feel comfortable just sharing whatever it is you'd like to share, or ask a question if you'd like to ask a question. What else do I have to say? I think that's pretty much it in terms of the announcements, but oh, I did, just on a personal note. Last week, I had mentioned I wasn't feeling very well. I am feeling better. I did want to just get into this very shortly. Yesterday, there was no show in terms of Dualistic Unity Raw. There were no Patreon groups either. And I did say to Andrew that I was calling in sick for the day, and that is partially true. Another part of that is the fact that, honestly, there's just a shit ton happening in my life at the moment, most of which I can't really get into the details of here, but anybody who does know me knows, I wouldn't have taken the day off if it wasn't for good reason. And it was. It allowed me to get my grounding. It allowed me to kind of get my space back, get some wherewithal, so I could come back to this conversation without having any loose ends in terms of things that I hadn't had a chance to reflect on and kind of tie back into whatever the hell it is that I'm embodying here and now. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who was understanding about that day off. I did miss everybody. I did miss the conversation because it's always a lot of fun, but I just want everyone to know I was still talking to myself, so nothing changed.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know we, talk plenty off camera and everything, but yeah, because the reality is, like, we're putting everything we got into this. Like, I don't even think of, it's funny because and now I think it's been helpful for me to get back into society and like other conversations, because I realize how much it's always just, I'm here now, and there's conversations that ensue, there's experiences that happening. And I think now that I have another aspect of my life that I've kind of been missing back, I come back to this like more ready and understanding that this is still, I'm just having my experience. I just happen to be sitting down in front of a camera and a microphone and a fucking light in front of me and recording something. And that's it. Like, there isn't so much a differentiation. That being said, we put a lot of energy and Ray puts a fuckload of energy and work into everything that we're doing here. Obviously, been a dream for a very long time, but that's not to say that it's always like this, it's just, the conversation. There's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot in the background. So anyway, I appreciate everything you do. And I know that everyone here appreciates everything you do, and the willingness to just put so much effort and energy into having a space to have the conversation, because that's all we're doing is creating a space. But there's a lot that is involved in that people may not realize. But yeah, just when it comes to having the conversation, it's I don't know, fun to come back to the recognition that, like, this is what we're doing. Like, we're at work right now having having a chat about this, and there's no direction, there's nowhere we need to get. So it's fun to realize that. But that said, there's still a ton that goes into it. And so it's because we haven't really taken any days off. I think yesterday, maybe there was one other day we shifted things around. Usually it's just a shift more than time off, because even, we take the week off at the retreats, but that's because we're at a fucking retreat, and that's like an all day, everyday thing for a week. But it doesn't even really cross my mind the thought of, taking extended time off. And eventually we'll have that and, get back to that for sure. But right now it comes down to having the conversation. And so just the continued process of doing so is a lot of fun. And I think it's shifted, and it's constantly shifting and changing. But the core of it will always be the conversation and the willingness to explore just how much there is to reality, and the unwillingness to settle upon anything outside the recognition that you exist. And what the fuck that means, we're finding out as we go. But yeah, it's not even the thought of taking extended time off. It's like, yeah, we could do that and then have the conversation, as you said, still talking to myself. So I don't know, might as well toss a microphone in front of me here and there.
Yeah, well, this is it. And I think this is the point that we've been trying to make this whole fucking episode, with my little green dude in the field and the ladder and all that stuff, is the fact that I got nowhere to go. See, that's the thing. Like, regardless of what I'm doing, I'm still doing. And so that's it. That's my existence. For reality, for eternity. That's all I've ever known. That's all I'm ever going to know. Me doing. And so that's enough for me. I don't need to be more. I don't need to get to some place. I don't need to achieve any specific thing by any means. I just like doing. And so I just get really into doing. And what am I doing? Being. That's really it. But that's eternity to me. So there's nowhere to go. I may as well just enjoy it for what it is. And that's what's led me to this conversation, and led to Dualistic Unity, and led to half the enthusiasm that we feel coming off of the people in our community as a whole, because they're doing it for them. They're doing what they've always been doing. They're being themselves, and they're just getting into that rather than trying to be something else, rather than trying to get somewhere to be something else. They're just getting into what they're always doing, which is being. That's your eternity. Doing and being as existence itself. There's nothing you can do that's going to add more to what you are. So you may as well just watch yourself unfold and enjoy it. And if you're going to do that and there's nothing to fear, then fuck it. You might as well just go hard. And that's exactly why Dualistic Unity is so fucking ambitious at the end of the day. And it's not because we're trying to strive to achieve anything. It's because there's nothing in our minds that goes, maybe we can't do that. Like, if it's an option, it's possible. We may not have the resources or the path to get to that option right now. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It doesn't mean it's not going to manifest down the road as a result of one step to the next step to the next step. I don't fucking know. And that's what I'm good with. I don't know. I don't fucking know what is possible. I don't know if what we're doing right now is going to change the all of fucking everything. But it makes sense to me, because what we're doing right now is the all of everything. It's all connected. It's all ripples. That's enough. Let's just stop saying what's possible and just be what's possible.
Well said. That'll be a quote at some point. What are we doing? I'm doing being. That's it. Kind of like Dualistic Unity. You can't settle upon something, because as soon as you say, I'm doing this to be this, to become this, to get this place, to get this thing, to become this thing, it's like you're back in it. You're just doing being all the time. And that's it. It doesn't give you something to settle upon, but it keeps you free. You maintain that state of freedom, and there's no risk, no real risk to anything. There's the perception of risk, but through that, it's tough to settle upon too much. And that's all we're doing. Just the relentless unwillingness to settle, and seeing where that takes us.
Just more of here now.
Exactly.
What the hell? Thanks everyone for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. We're going to wrap up. We're going to continue in 14 minutes on Patreon. Do join us if you can. And if not, we will see you tomorrow.